Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really complex and honestly disturbing theory. It's about tracing the invisible strings that connect high art, elite power, and ultimately organized crime. We're talking about a hidden architecture that shapes what society accepts as culture and what it buries as scandal.
So you might be looking at this and thinking, okay, what could a child actor, a political scandal in France, and old war propaganda possibly have in common? Well, the theory we're breaking down today argues they aren't separate things at all. Instead, they're all pieces of a single hidden system of power. Our job is to follow the threats.
So here's our roadmap. We're going to build this argument in 4 parts. We'll start with something pretty abstract, a cultural image, and then follow that idea all the way down to a very real, very tangible criminal operation.
All right, let's kick things off with part 1. First, we have to get our heads around a very specific idea: how a particular kind of image of a child is crafted and then presented to all of us for a very calculated reason.
Okay, the key thing to understand here is that this isn't just about a picture. It's actually a kind of cultural training. The theory goes that we are actively taught to view the vulnerability of a young person through this very specific, powerful lens of serious art. And the case of Brooke Shields is absolutely essential to understanding this. I mean, think about it. She was just 11 years old, put right in the middle of a film about child prostitution. But the cultural machine around it didn't frame it as exploitation. It framed it as cinema.
And that right there, that's the mechanism. You take explicit, deeply problematic material involving a child and you transform it. The prestige of so-called art cinema creates a permission slip for the audience. It teaches them how to look and even how to feel cultured and sophisticated while they're doing it.
So we've seen how this works in movies, in the cultural sphere. Now let's see how that same logic translates to the social world. Because this isn't just about what's on a screen. It's about the real-life environments where abuse is allowed to happen, often right out in the open.
This idea explains how powerful people get insulated. It's not a literal room with 4 walls, of course. It's a social one, built out of things like status, reputation, and all these unspoken rules about who you're allowed to question and who you're not.
For a brutal real-world example of this, look no further than the Olivier Duhamel case in France. Here was a guy who was a hugely respected political insider, and the accusations against him ripped the curtain back on the profound silence that can exist inside these protected social rooms.
I mean, the fallout was so massive that it forced a response from the French president himself. This just goes to show you that this elite family atmosphere isn't some private little issue. Its consequences are so big they can require action from the very top of government.
So how is a social room like this actually maintained? Well, it's through a kind of invisible discipline. People in these elite circles just learn. They learn what you can talk about and what you can't. They learn which topics require a delicate euphemism and which people have a reputation so big that you just don't dare challenge them.
Okay, so we've got these protected social spaces, these pockets of enforced silence. But what sets the rules for the entire building? The argument here is that these local atmospheres don't just spring up out of nowhere. They're often directed by a much bigger structure, a central point of control.
The metaphor here is a puppet. If all that cultural prestige we talked about provides the strings, then the control bar is the wooden cross that gathers them all up and directs the whole show. And this theory argues that, because of its unique position after World War II, the United States effectively became that control bar. And you can actually track this evolution of command pretty clearly. Look at how it shifts. It starts with really direct, overt wartime propaganda, and then slowly morphs into something much more subtle, but maybe even more powerful. Influence through cultural policy and the sheer global dominance of Hollywood.
In the beginning, the US was literally scripting its enemy during the war. Films like Know Your Enemy Japan weren't just simple reporting, they were actively building a narrative, defining an entire country for American viewers as something to be feared and controlled. After the war, though, that control got a lot more sophisticated. It went beyond just propaganda and embedded itself into things like education policy and cultural programs. This didn't just rebuild Japan, it shaped its recovery in a way that created what the source here calls long-lasting forms of dependency on American ways of doing things.
All right, and that brings us to the final piece of this whole architecture. This is where that abstract idea of a control bar becomes terrifyingly real and concrete.
At this final stage, the control bar is no longer just a symbol or a metaphor. It becomes a person and a network. Jeffrey Epstein essentially weaponized the tools of the elite, things like philanthropy, exclusive social access, and glamour, and turned them into a cold,
ruthlessly efficient machine for crime.
Take a look at this number, 60. What does it mean? Well, according to an internal Justice Department review, 60 is the number of counts that federal prosecutors were considering for an indictment against Epstein all the way back in 2007.
And here is the absolute gut punch. A 60-count indictment was on the table, and the system just retreated. This is what the power of that control bar looks like in practice, the ability to make the very institutions of justice fold and back away.
And based on reporting from ABC, you can see how this control worked at street level. It wasn't crude or thuggish, it was sophisticated. It used the language of hope and aspiration, scholarships, mentorship, the promise of a better, more glamorous life as its main recruiting tool.
Now, this is a really important clarification from the Associated Press that helps focus the argument. While the common story is about a huge trafficking ring, the strongest evidence actually points to something more specific: Epstein's own personal operational power, and the elite world that enabled him and let him get away with it for decades. And this is the final, chilling connection that ties it all together. The theory moves from the abstract power that scripted an entire nation during a war to the very real, tangible power of a man like Epstein, with his hand physically on the mechanism of abuse, protected by the exact same structures of prestige we talked about at the very beginning.
So we're left with a pretty provocative final thought. This explainer laid out one theory, one possible architecture of power. The question it really forces us to ask is, now that we can sort of recognize the blueprint, where else might these hidden structures of command still be operating right now,